in your office?
Yep.
Yeah. I could walk up and get it and run back down here.
Don, you can just go on the township's website too, to the meeting calendar and click on the agenda there.
That's a good idea. Let me see. I'm trying to do this on the phone while the computer's open here.
Whenever you're ready, Don, we can go. Whenever you're ready, Don, we're good to go on this end.
Well, I'm still trying to get an agenda here, Devin. So
Okay, no worries.
hang on, just be patient for just a second.
No worries. I appreciate you being patient with me.
A good suggestion here.
Brett has a small one.
Are there for information and discussion, or is there a presentation?
Brett has a presentation for you, partway through.
Good. All right, so we do have. Just more or less consensus?
They're just by consensus, so if anybody has any
So-
problems,
so if
go
nobody
ahead.
says there's any problems, we'll just. Okay, I just lost everybody again here. Are you with me still?
I did. I lost everybody too, but I'm looking at the agenda, so I'm okay myself.
I lost the agenda and the pictures. Are we still there?
Brother.
All right, well, that was number 4. We'll take the minutes as approved.
Good call.
No problems? I can't see you, so you have to say, you can't even raise your hand.
It looks great, Don.
All right.
Yeah, I'm fine too.
Okay. What's number 5? Is that the presentations?
Number 5 is action items and new business.
And is there anything there?
Nope.
Nope.
All right, we can discuss new business or put that off to the end as we discuss how to go forward from here. Does anybody care if it's put off to the end?
I think at the end is better.
Or we'll be missing a couple of people though at that point. Maybe we should do it now. At least we get the benefit of Steve and Andy.
I'm good with that myself.
All right. So
I'm good with it as well.
Okay, good. So just in terms of new business, just to kick it off, where there were a few things that were on our plate, we were moving towards resolution back in March. Maybe we can just be updated. I think there was the design guidelines and there were some other things that we were discussing with a view to making a recommendation to council, and then everything got put off. So for me, at least, I'd just like to know where those things are. Are we going to pick up those discussions, or has time already passed us by, or where are we sit with those? And then where, from, I guess, the township's point of view, what do we see going forward as things that we really need to look at? So I guess that's a question for either Andy or Brett.
Go ahead, Brett.
The discussion that we had the last time about the design guidelines is really what's prompted what I'm about to present today about the development permit system. We had a fairly considerable discussion at the last meeting about how to make your design guidelines stick a little better and implement them. Right now, it's done more or less on a voluntary basis. So early in the pandemic, I spent my time when the office was closed looking at implementation tools, and I've come up with the community planning permit system. So that's sort of flowed out of our last discussion about having design guidelines that actually have a little more teeth, is why I brought that up. So we are still working with the consultants that made the presentation at the last workshop we had, and I think the community planning permit discussion is part of that overall conversation. So, which also leads into official plan work at the county level initially, but.
Hello?
Yep.
Oh,
Sorry, I've just lost my voice there for a second.
yeah, you did. Yeah. Okay.
Need more tea.
Don't we all?
Anyway, so that's really what prompted me bringing forward the community planning permit system discussion today, because I think it's tied into implementing our design guidelines.
Okay. That makes sense. And I remember we did have a discussion on development permits, so it's very interesting to see that's going to be fleshed out. Is that the main item on the agenda going forward for the next little while, or is there anything else?
Well, I know at the staff level, there's some other conversations going on about things that we might bring forward, sort of more on the engineering side. Some of the water quantity work that's going on. There's some streetscape things that infrastructure are working on that they'd like to bring forward to have a review or a commentary at this committee, which is kind of a healthy growth topic. So there's other things going on. That's all related, I guess, to design guidelines and development standards and that whole end of the discussion.
Yeah, the development standards. So I guess over the past, 8 months, we haven't missed anything. Those are still under development, and they're still going to come forward to us along with this development permit discussion. So is that what I take from what you're saying?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Don, just some things, we've been busy with a lot of other things just with the COVID, so some things have not moved along as quickly as we'd hoped over the last 8 months, but we're back into getting some of those moving and anticipate in the next few months bringing those forward to council, to the committee.
Okay, that's
And
good
I
for me,
think-
because that kind of sets out the role for the committee. That's kind of where we left off, and we do, I think, as a group, want to look at those kind of things. So it's good that we'll still have a chance to do that.
Yep.
Anybody else? I know Maddie, you wanted to speak.
Sure. I guess like this will be my last meeting. So I've moved to Mount Forest. And I just kind of wanted to maybe tell people about my situation and talk about how I think it impacts this committee and what I hope for this committee going forward, even though I won't be on it. But so I'm a single mom and I work a pretty good job. I work well above what is considered a living wage. And I can't afford to live in Center Wellington. So I've moved up to Mount Forest where it's more affordable. And my hope for this committee when it started and when I joined it would be that we looked at the structures that are pushing people out of our community. So people that are the working poor, people that are on social assistance, and sadly, people like myself that aren't really the working poor but still can't afford to live in Center Wellington. And it hasn't really been that. It's been more about, design guidelines. What does development look like from kind of an aesthetics perspective? And I really hope going forward that this committee kind of pushes back with the township and says, design guidelines aren't the end all and be all of healthy growth. We need to make sure that the people who can afford to live here are from a diversity of economic backgrounds. And right now, I work with people who are on welfare or, just getting by, especially now because of COVID, and they're all leaving the community. That's they're forced to do. And so our community might look nice, but we're going to be missing a huge portion of our population that to me matters and to me should have a say in housing and should have a say in affordability. And they don't have that right now. And I hope that this group can take on some of that challenge and push back with the county, push back with the township and say, sure, things need to look nice, but we also need to make sure people can afford to live here that aren't making 80 grand a year or more. So this will be my last meeting and it's kind of sucks. It sucks that I have to leave my community.
Well, it does, and we're going to miss you on this committee as well. So very sorry to hear that, but it's understandable. I certainly share your hope that we do get into those kinds of generic discussions and maybe even more tangible discussions along those lines. Once we clear away this kind of administrative stuff that we're looking at, we've got a fair amount of time in this term to look at those larger questions. And I know there's a lot of people that are interested in that, and I hope that's what we can kind of get to. But we'll see how that goes. Anybody else have comments?
Yeah, I can't see anybody, so I'm just.
I can't either, but I can hear you. I did get the agenda too, Andy. Thanks.
It's Tony. So first of all, I totally echo Don's comment, Maddie. I'm really sorry to hear you're leaving the committee because I think you do bring a really good voice to the table, and but I understand. And I guess my question to you would be, and I agree with you. I think we don't want to lose the economic diversity of a broad population in our community. And I wonder if that's around building, I know the word isn't affordable housing, but housing types that fit, here's everybody again, housing types that fit all economic strata, or if there's something else or if there's an additional thing to that, Maddie, that you're thinking about.
I would love to see something like inclusionary zoning where we say, this area of Center Wellington, if you're going to build here, X amount of your builds have to be affordable housing, which means under market value right now.
Right.
And there would need to be some probably in tax incentives or something. But right now we kind of have developers buy up a spot and they submit a plan and there's not a whole lot of oversight as to what the cost of those homes or dwellings are. And I think probably Steve can talk to this. He's seen the pushback of trying to put in multi-unit, buildings, and people don't want that density. And I think it's our group's job to say, we need that density. We need that density to ensure people can live here and to ensure that there are some affordable options or attainable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Does staff want to respond to that, or anybody else have comments?
Kelly here.
Hello.
Yeah, it's Kelly here. No, I think, Maddie, I think that's one of the reasons that we wanted you on this group is to bring that perspective for sure. So not happy that you have to leave your own community, and I take that seriously. And it's about it's not just about changing rules. It's about the financial piece of it. Is we need to have more rental stock. We need to have more of a certain kind of building in across Center Wellington, and we just don't have that right now. And we need to pave the way for that. We need to get the political support to allow for people at different income levels to stay in the community that they love. And I think we all get that. It's about what mechanisms you put in place to have that happen. You have to have political courage. You have to have the political will to back it up, so that when things come to council, they're approved because you know that we need it. So there's some work that we have to do on the political side of things. But there's no question in my mind that if there's a will to move ahead with well-designed, affordable, multi-level residential properties, that there's a market for it here, and it's a way that we can keep people living here. At the county level and the township level, we understand part of it. We have to work with some of the development communities, like development companies that we have in our community who know how to build these buildings, and we have to make sure that we have appropriately zoned areas and move ahead on it. And that's something that we wanted to push forward on. COVID over the last few months has kind of taken us off this item because we haven't been able to meet as much as we wanted to. Very much so, I want this committee to have a say on it, and to push. The county's doing its plan right now when it comes to its official plan, and we want to make sure that this group has something to say about it along those lines. So I want to make sure that happens. But it's not a staff issue. I think both staff of the county and staff of the township recognize that we need those kinds of homes and those kind of apartments and those kind of rentals here. It's a matter of making sure that the political will is behind it. And so that's where things sit there. I think we are going to see it. These things take a bit of time to result in finished products and finished developments. But it's a fight worth fighting, and we have to do better. We absolutely have to push in that area. So thanks for your input in this committee. I really appreciated it.
Did I see your hand, Councillor Foster? Make sure you're not muted. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Maddie. I'm sad to hear that you're leaving as well, Maddie. You bring a good perspective to this committee. Maddie, I wondered if you could give me some numbers, if you will. I'd like to understand more clearly the difference in pricing between, I'll say, Fergus and Mount Forest, or Center Wellington and Mount Forest. Can you give me some more detail? What have you found in your search for a home in terms of the difference in price between our community and Wellington North?
To be honest, there's not a huge difference. I've kind of lucked out that I have a friend that is renting a house up here that I can get in on. So my rent is $700, which is like unheard of. But the rent in all of Wellington County is insane. Like, I just looked at a place that was $2,000 in Palmerston for 3 bedrooms plus. Like, no one on minimum wage. I don't know how people are doing it. Like, I see clients that I have that are on Ontario Works. A single person on Ontario Works gets a budget of $733. Their rent portion of that is under $500. You can't rent a single apartment for under $1,000. So that person on Ontario Works is either precariously housed, which is homeless, or working under the table, which means they're at jeopardy of losing their Ontario Works altogether, or they're leaving the community. Same for anyone on an Ontario Disability Support Program. You're making only about 1,100. So either you're spending $1,000 on housing and you have $100 left for everything else, or you're leaving the community. And I think we see more and more people, sorry, the dog's barking. I think we see more and more people are putting up with shitty landlords, are living in conditions that you and I would not consider to be housed. I have, people living in trailer homes that don't have running water, but it's better than being on the street. The state of housing in Center Wellington and across Wellington housing is appalling. People are leaving. People are moving further and further up north. But it's gone beyond Center Wellington. It's all of Wellington County. People can't live here, or they're living in disgusting situations that I don't think any one of us on this committee would ever want to see anyone in. It's shocking.
Can I answer your question? And who has other hand did I see up? Brett, did I see your hand? You're muted.
I just wanted to make a comment. Part of the reason why, obviously, I think the prices and the the rents are, a reflection, at least at the provincial level. They're telling municipalities that it's a supply problem. Housing's not getting built fast enough in order to provide the supply to meet the demand. So the provincial initiative is to do things to speed up the development process so that the housing can get brought on stream faster than it is today. And so one of the things we talked about at this committee a while ago that the county's proceeding with is the official plan amendment that allows people to build apartments in their houses and a second unit in the backyard. So coming down the pipe is anybody and it would apply to single detached, semi-detached, or townhouse dwellings, would be able to add one unit in the house and one unit outside the house in a detached building. That's a provincial requirement under Bill 108 that municipalities all have to allow. So that's to make it easier for people to add, they call it gentle density, by adding one or two units to their existing house. The second thing that there's a lot of talk about is what's called the missing middle in housing. And the last several years, housing has gone from, either developers are building single detached houses or they're building higher density apartments and townhouses. And the kind of housing that we used to see in our communities, more duplexes and triplexes and a little 4-unit apartment building, are really frozen out by our zoning that over the years has evolved to, you have a zone where a single detached dwelling is the only kind of house that can be built and nothing else. Or you have a zone that a semi-detached dwelling can be built and nothing else. So there's a lot of municipalities that are moving towards eliminating that zoning where only single detached is a permitted use. And it opens up opportunities for 3 or 4 units to be integrated into those existing neighborhoods. Again, that's a form of what they call gentle density. And there are examples in our community where there's little buildings that might have 4 units in it, that maybe were built back in the 50s and 60s that just doesn't seem to happen anymore. People want to bring back that kind of housing. But part of the reason why I brought forward the development permit system today, again, is it's a tool that not only helps us implement our design guidelines, but also gets away from that rigid zoning that takes somebody 4 or 5 months to change the zoning to add to housing. One of the things that we are hearing from builders about our zoning too is the height limit that we presently have, where most of downtown Fergus and Elora and the commercial streets, the highway commercial areas where we want to allow, or our official plan by policy encourages higher density and intensification, we only allow 3 stories. And the market to be able to build a building today that with affordable units, when you're limited to 3 stories, I think is a huge constraint. So the design guidelines and development permits and all those things are kind of all tied together into trying to solve the housing situation from the supply side. By the government, provincial government wants us to make it easier to get housing built faster. And that's sort of what the different initiatives they're trying to do. The province they've exempted a bunch of different kinds of development from development charges. They've changed the timing that development charges are paid for rental housing. And we have already started to see people take us up on that. So there are changes coming that are going to make it easier for people to get housing going.
Thank you, Brad. It sounds like a lot of that is in the township's control, and I think that takes you back to the mayor's point about political will. I thought I saw Councillor McCrae. Did you have your hand up before Brett started to speak?
Yes, thank you, Don. I just want to share everyone else's disappointment that you're leaving us, Maddie, because I certainly appreciated your perspective on matters and the fact that you have represented the whole issue of the working poor. I mean, I'm dealing currently with some homeless issues in my ward as well as potential homeless issues in other parts of the township. And some of the things that I've learned from dealing with the county is the fact that if anyone's making an income of $20,000 or less, you can't afford to live here. I'm also finding that in terms of trying to find some supportable housing, there's a waiting list of 2 to 5 years.
I'd say 5 to 10 years.
Well, to 10, okay, because I was told 2 to 5. And especially if you're a man, it's even longer. So one of the challenges I see is the fact that we continue to build mostly houses which are being bought up by people coming from Toronto, which is driving the prices up. So I've always been a proponent of having more sort of 3 to 5 story buildings that we can try and get more affordable housing in here. Because one of the other challenges I see is with our tourism industry, it's typically low paying. So if we're going to have people working in the tourism industry, we need to have the housing to support their incomes. And I just don't see that here in our community currently. So as Mayor Linton was saying, political will is very important to getting the housing that we need. And I'm certainly on board with that. It's pushing forward to see what we can do to get more. Because that really is what a small community is all about.
Okay, thank you. Did I see Councillor Foster's hand up previously?
Thank you, Don. I had a question for Brett. Some of us may remember what was known as a MURB. A MURB was an initiative by the Government of Canada to encourage multi-unit. MURB stands for multi-unit residential building. And what the government did back in the 70s to house the burgeoning quantity of young people, which were baby boomers, they allowed for some tax incentives so that you could basically depreciate your building faster than normal. And that encouraged the building of many sixplexes and fourplexes. Those of us from around Ferguson, Guelph will, along Speedvale and Victoria and North Guelph, there are many MURBs, fourplexes, sixplexes from the 60s and 70s. So I guess my question, Brad, is do you see the federal government having a place here at the table by encouraging multi-unit res type buildings and giving tax support to do it?
I haven't seen a lot of federal activity on the housing side, but I know CMHC are working with some people to do some things. There's pilot projects going on. So I think we will see CMHC supported. But Councillor Foster, when I talked about the general density, that kind of housing that you're talking about is exactly what I was referring to. I wasn't aware of the specific program maybe that encouraged it, but that's what I see as missing of things that that got built, you know, probably at that time it was the, you know, the number of kids that needed to be housed because of the baby boom, right?
Yeah.
We're not doing that anymore. When those types of housing where you can fit a fourplex onto an existing street that fits the streetscape, we've zoned those out of existence. And you know, here's an example of the amount of time it took for a couple of our recent zone changes to go through, that we're simply adding, you know, taking a lot that was zoned for a single detached dwelling to zone it for a semi-detached dwelling. And the zoning process partly delayed because of COVID, but it took a long time, and it shouldn't take that much time for someone to add 1 or 2 units of housing.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else before I go back to second timers around? Councillor McCray.
Just one question I have. I've heard complaints about the number of long-term rental units that have been taken out of circulation and turned into Airbnb units. Is that something that we should be looking at, is bringing in some sort of controls that govern what type of units can be used for Airbnb versus must remain as long-term rental? Because that is a challenge that we're facing here in our community.
Certainly an issue in Elora. Anybody want to respond to that, Brett?
Well, I think we can put zoning rules in place that define what short-term rental housing is, and there's a few of those that we're looking at it in the bylaw. We did bring forward a draft bylaw back in November, if you recall, for the additional dwelling units that I referred to earlier, that the county's now working on the OPA. But we've already drafted zoning and we brought it here. And I think Maddie brought it up at that time, that the definition of short-term rental and not wanting those units to be used for short-term rental. So we have taken a look at that in our next draft bylaw, that we'll bring it forward when the county's done dealing with their official plan amendment. We'll have a definition of short-term rental housing. And at least as a start, putting it in your zoning bylaw is a good start as a way to try to deal with the situation. But at the end of the day, it's all going to come back to enforcement. And you know, unless we are prepared to license units that we don't do now, we're going to be challenged to actually enforce what we might put into our zoning provisions. You know, it could be there's some of these incentives that the provincial government's having. Remains to be seen if we have the authority. Let's say, for example, a rental building that goes up today, the province is defining that as having 4 or more units in it. And if it's got 4 or more units in it, and it's tended to be rental housing, they get a little bit of a break on the payment of their development charges. So instead of paying all of the development charges when the building permit is due, they get to pay in installments, and I think it works out to over a period of 6 years. But that exemption in the development charge, or that provision, doesn't say that we get to enter into an agreement with someone doing that. It would be nice if we could say, if you're going to get this break and not pay development charges, that you cannot use it as short-term rental housing. So, I mean, that we've got a lot of questions about that aspect. Again, one of the advantages of the development permit system that I'm going to introduce today is we get to attach conditions to a permit or enter into an agreement that we don't have that ability under zoning.
Okay, well, anybody else? That was a very good discussion. And okay, we still want to, who haven't I heard from? Don.
Yeah, do we have any idea of the scope of the Airbnb rentals in the rental buildings? Is there any research or anything done on it? Just so we get an idea of how big a problem it is.
At one point, I was given the number of 78 units, but that was probably about a year ago.
Yeah, I don't know how you would ever figure out whether they're going for short-term rentals or long-term rentals. Unless you get the building managers or owners to divulge that, but they're probably not going to want to do that.
Sort of going on the Airbnb site and just listing all of the units in Center
Well, you could, yeah, that would be one way,
There's
yeah.
112 listed for Laura right now.
You can find out, and it is a big problem. I don't know if it's a big problem as much in the rest of the township, but certainly it is, so. Okay, who else? Anybody I haven't heard from yet before we
But I would like to see.
pick up? All right, Maddie, then Steve.
I just wanted to add that I think 2 points. I think for the Airbnb, there have been places that have done a permit system, which I know means you need someone to do the permits. And the fear is if you don't have bylaw or someone to enforce if you don't have a permit. But I think there are people who would be deterred from putting it in an Airbnb specifically if they knew that potentially without a permit they would get a fine. So even without the bylaw person or the teeth behind it, I think it would deter some people from going that route. So I do think it should still be an option looked at. And I just also wanted to touch on the point of having more housing stock as the solution to more affordable rents or housing. I think it doesn't quite get at it because if the demand, like we'd have to have so much housing stock and rental stock to get to a point where we see the prices go down. So I think we need something like inclusionary zoning that says, if you're gonna put in a building, X amount of those units have to be below market rent. I think that is the only way to ensure continued affordable housing in the county or in Center Wellington. That's all.
Okay. Steve, I thought you said, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, sorry, Don. This is great discussion, and Maddie, I do echo the point of everybody else that we're going to sorely miss you on our committee because I really have enjoyed your input. And as a developer, I feel that a lot of the times what you're referring to is oftentimes put on the developer to create affordable housing. And I think the basis of all this lies right in what Brett was saying. There's affordable components that we have to build into the cost of developing and providing the housing type that you're referring to. That is solely based on the cost of doing things. So for a developer, of course, you're going to be looking at a piece of property for the development purposes so that you can, bottom line, you make money on the lands that you're bringing forward. Because if you cannot make money on bringing those lands forward, it makes it very challenging to consider an economic equation. Why go forward with a project? So one of the biggest stumbling blocks that I see as a builder or developer with trying to create affordable housing is simply the costs of doing what we're doing. So there's a two-pronged concern. And Brett's spoken to defer development charges, but I don't think that is enough. I think we'd almost have to eliminate development charges on trying to create affordable housing. And the other thing that I think is we have to stress is that there is a big, huge, what I'm seeing, contingency of people coming in, and the model home that we have right now has a basement accessory apartment created in it. And it's really interesting that I went through the processes of creating this accessory apartment and I'm getting a large demand for it. But it was very challenging to do from a perspective of having all the plans and the built unit meet the demands for the building department to create that unit. It became it was not clear as to how we could do it, and direction from the building department to meet the requirements of an accessory apartment were really challenging. So I would have to say that we would need a clear guideline for how we can do this in an affordable manner. And I don't think you would have one builder or developer not willing to build affordable housing if we could do it affordably, but also preserve a level of profit for going forward and doing so, because getting land and bringing land onto the market is a very challenging and time consuming and very expensive process. So from a builder or developer's perspective, we have no problem with creating affordable housing if we can get the assistance or our cost down. And I'm thinking that that's the bottom line in order to make it happen. And if we can encourage this type of building, especially on a single family home, creating these basement apartments to offset costs for associated with the principal residence, where people can bring in-laws in, or they can rent out to families like yourselves. I could see a coexistence of community building that would work, but it has to be done affordably. And sometimes right now legislation is such that both from a cost perspective are very challenging for us to do. And I'm sorry, this is a great discussion and I wish I could continue to hear it, but I have to go to the next meeting. But thank you, everybody. And I'll look forward to your details on your permit processing, Brett. I think it's interesting for sure. So
Well, I think you're going to hear a lot more about it anyway in our next several meetings. This has been very good in terms of where we go from here and the kinds of things that we're going to be looking at. So this has been a good discussion, but it's just the beginning, Steve, so don't worry about it. Don?
Yeah. If you had a piece of property, Steve, and say there was 100 units on it, and you wanted to have 15, they could be rental, like subsidized. Is there a way that the development charges for those 15 units could be spread on the other guys, the other 85?
Maybe Brett should answer that.
it's Don, it's kind of like shuffling the blocks around. It's still an input cost. So it's an interesting concept or an interesting idea. But the point being is, overall, development charges, it have to be like a commitment from different levels of government in order to offset or reduce the development charges, because we all know that development charges go a long way towards the economic coffers of the municipality for future growth. Without it, we don't have future growth. So there is a necessity, and I understand a need to collect a development charge for all products and all homes. But when we talk about higher density or units that go up instead of down, well, maybe that's the opportunity where the development charge could be applicable to the one block, but yet it apply to, spread out amongst this higher density unit. So maybe that's something that could be considered, certainly, for increased number of units in this manner. But I think it's like how we split the pie, like in spreading it out, is fine, but I think it's a total reduction in a particular block to make it more affordable for individual units to be built. Now, the other thing that's happening in the marketplace is a lot of people are trying to get out of those. We're getting a huge influx of people from the GTA trying to get out of their condominium or their high rise or their multi or their MERB that Bob was just mentioning, to get out of, to get to a single family home. And it might be COVID protecting their families or something, but I definitely see people needing or wanting a single family home for their own space. And they're willing now, with every meeting and everything that can be done, virtually now, they're getting out of that area, coming to purchase their single family home. And yes, Maddie, we are getting a strong surge of people even going north because it is much cheaper. And just to throw this fact out there, a house that I can build in Palmerston versus Elora is $100,000 less by moving north. So that in and itself is a big catalyst.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Don Valerie and for Stephen. Would you be using Don's example of 100 units, one building of 15 and the 85? Stephen and Don, would you be more likely to build that 15-unit building if you could depreciate at 20% a year instead of the current CCA, which I think is only 4% a year? In other words, would the ability to depreciate that building more rapidly incent you to actually build it?
Steve is more of an expert at this stuff than I am, but it's all the little incremental stuff that add up to the total. And so if you can write it off faster, it's always going to be better. Like the government right now has a program where you can write off 45% of your machine. You buy a tractor, it's 45% the first year. Well, guess what? Everybody goes in and buys a tractor because that's not what usually happens. And if you could have delays like that and write off faster, that would always, like, it all helps. The development charges help, and it's every piece of it. And the problem is what's happened now is it all accumulates.
Okay. All right, Councillor McCray.
I've heard some really interesting ideas from Stephen and from others, and I'm wondering if it would be in our best interest to sort of form an affordable housing task force where developers and planning staff and maybe some interested residents would get together to discuss what are the barriers that are holding back building up our inventory of affordable housing, to look at each barrier separately and come up with a solution to resolving it, and then coming back and sharing it with council to maybe get something in place.
Well, I might be biased. I kind of thought that was this group, but if we need another group, that's certainly worth thinking about. Andy, I guess you have to go. Anybody want to respond to Councillor McCray's idea there?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind responding to that, Don. I do think that's this group. I do think that, Brett's going to be talking a little bit about some of his thoughts about that feed into that. But I mean, if this group doesn't do that kind of work, well, you really have to question the mandate of this group, because I think that's where we want to go as a group. And if I think about it, and I can't think about anybody here in the group that don't want their perspective on this, because that's why we brought this group together. Is there's a different perspective from everyone, and when we talk about that's one of the topics that made it important to me that we pulled this group together in the first place. So I'd like that to be something that we focus on. And really, the nature of the discussion today is really, really good, because we're starting to get thoughts and ideas about mechanisms that we can discuss that might contribute to making a positive difference here. Like, I think the will is there. It's not that there's barriers right now. Some are political, some are, as Steve was talking about, financial, making sure that there's an incentive there. Some are related to development charges. There's a number of things that came up in just this discussion today that I think we should pursue a little bit more. And then as a group, bring those recommendations to council as you've suggested. But I do think that's what this group is about, Ian. And if we could put items on the agenda that are related to this and kind of sequentially move towards those recommendations, and making sure that every discussion that we have builds on the ones before, I think that we can do a lot of good work here. And if we have to do some homework projects as individuals, I think that would be great. I'd be willing to take away some stuff and talk to the county about it. And I know some of the other people here that have areas of specialty would be good with that as well, and bring it back to this group. I think that's a really good suggestion, but I do think it's this group, Ian. My thoughts.
And I think just following up on that and something Don said as well, a lot of times the answers here, there's no one answer or no major surgery answer. There's a lot of little things that add up to the cost that someone like Steve would face. And sometimes it's just a matter of listing them all, thinking of them all, and then dealing with them, incrementally, because none of them are major in and of themselves, but added up, they make a huge difference. And that's kind of the practical work that we could do as we start to get concepts of, well, what's a barrier? Okay, timing of development charges, nature of development charges, the building code content, the streamlining of processing approvals, little things that you can work on individually, which cumulatively make a huge difference in the ability to deliver what we're all looking for. and Kelly, I'm just trying to remember, what's the term? We don't use affordable housing anymore. Wasn't there a new term at the county that you guys had? I can't remember what it was, but it seems to me there was something.
Attainable, maybe? Yeah, attainable.
Attainable housing. There we go. So I think that's a huge issue. When you start talking about it, it takes you into zoning, takes you into development permits, takes you into financing, takes you into the market, takes you into building code, takes you everywhere, planning. It's everything. And yet it comes down to, what are you dealing with? Well, we're dealing with trying to give everybody a shot at decent housing. And that's clearly, I think, just from this discussion, that is going to be the focus of this group going forward. And it takes us all through the development and the financing and the municipal processes. But what strikes me from this conversation, and I know we're going to hear about it from Brad in terms of development permits, there's an awful lot that's within the township's ability to deal with. And that takes you right back to the point that was made earlier about political will. But there is control there. There is, shall we say, ammunition, mechanisms, tools to deal with this problem to a great extent. And to me, that's very encouraging, because it's not something you say, oh, well, we'd love to do this, but the province has to do it, or the county has to do it. A lot of this is in the control of the township. And I guess the answer is, let's get some specific recommendations and let them go do it. So to me, that's very encouraging, and it gives us all lots to chew on going forward. I know we probably do want to get at the development permit thing, because that's kind of a indirect way to a lot of this. Don, I'll give you the last comment here.
Yeah, I agree, Ian. I think what we really need to focus on is, what can we do? We can make recommendations to other levels of government, whether it's county or province or federal, but it's what tools do we have here that we can make a difference? And I think the sooner we do this, like get this maybe part of the next meeting, or I'm not sure what the meeting schedule is like, but the sooner we get that, and then we can maybe everybody think about it. And anyhow, the sooner we can get at it, it's going to take time to do, as to how we attack each of the pieces of it. But yeah, anyhow, but let's do what we can do.
Okay. Kelly.
Sorry, I wanted to say one last thing, Don. If we could commit, and I can help with this as well. If we could commit to next meeting to have like our plan of attack. So let's figure out, based on what you were talking about, Don and Ian, if we can figure out what the barriers are. First of all, what are we driving towards? To me, at the end of the day, we're driving towards doing what we can so that people who want to live in Center Washington can afford to live in Center Washington. Bottom line, that's what we're driving towards. So then let's work out our framework, our project plan, and then we can identify our clear action for this group to take. I think that's what's missing right now. And I think we did a very similar thing at the Economic Development Task Force, Don, if you remember back. We established our project plan, and then we just worked it through. So I think if we can commit to the next meeting of a healthy growth to come to this table with a real clear framework on how we're going to sequentially drive towards something, identifying the barriers and who's got to be involved, and then what's the timelines, I think that's going to help to provide a little bit of structure to our discussion. So that's what I'd suggest that we have for next month when we get together, and that will help us to really get some real solid work done while we're meeting.
I think that's a great idea.
Me too. Yep.
Okay. All right. Maybe we should move on. And Maddie, again, thank you. Look what you've triggered here. That's why we're going to miss you. So it's, again, all the best, and thanks a lot. So and keep in touch. All right. Oh, sorry.
Maddie, could you not, sorry, is this virtual meeting not going to work for you from Mount Forest?
I think it's more, I'm not in the township. I'm not a township resident, so I don't really meet the criteria of being part of the group.
We could be there informally.
Yep. An associate member of the group, Maddie.
Consultant.
A consultant, yes, consultant to the group.
Sure, if you're going to pay me.
Unpaid, yeah, volunteer. All right, we'll think of something. Anybody else before we move on? I think Brett's probably itching here to get on with it, so. Okay, so next on the agenda, I've just lost it again. Where is it? There we go. Working group updates. I don't think we have any. Is that right? Item 6. So can we move straight on then to item 7, the information items? And that's Brett, right?
Sure. So as noted in my earlier discussion, the reason why I brought this development permit or community planning permit system forward for at least an introduction to this group, and as we go forward on the housing, if we want to shift gears and talk about attainable housing a little more at this group, I'm all for it. Marianne and I have a lot of conversations in our office about how do we eliminate some of the barriers to get more housing built and deal with zoning and design all together. So, and we've wondered, is it a healthy growth issue? Is it an economic development task force issue? What's the right driver? So the suggestion that we bring stuff through this group, I think, is great for us because we have a lot of ideas and we've wondered where to take them. But one of the things I think will eventually come up as a tool is the development permit system. So it kind of flowed out of our last meeting where we had a workshop on the design guidelines, and the ability to sort of really implement them at the permit stage or whatnot. So as I said before, early in the pandemic, I spent a bit of time researching tools that we could have to implement our design guidelines and give them a little more teeth. And one of the things that's relatively new is started out as what's called a development permit system. It was introduced by the province into the Planning Act in sort of the mid 2000s. And more recently in 2016, and now the current government is calling it the Community Planning Permit System. And it is being promoted as a tool, if you will, in order to reduce the amount of time that it takes to get a development project approved. The idea is that it'll streamline the development, but also allow more flexibility in terms of zoning than currently exists. And it does that by sort of combining the site plan and the zoning review into a single process that results in the issuance of a development permit, as opposed to where we might say today something has obtained site plan approval, or something that needs a zone change and a site plan or minor variance together gets integrated into one process, which is the development permit. Building permits are still required, so the development permit is not a replacement for the building permit part. Devlin, if you wouldn't mind putting up, one of the things that I included in the agenda was an open house presentation from Town of Niagara on the Lake that are looking at community planning permit system. So I thought what I would do is just sort of walk through their open house PowerPoint, because it's a fairly succinct summary of the process. And maybe we park this for a while. Where we end up is we need official plan policies that authorize it, and so that's part of a discussion we'll have with the County of Wellington as they update their OP. So can you go on to the next slide, Devlin, please? So in the context of the Town of Niagara on the Lake, they were directed to amend their official plan to come up with the policies that you need to authorize a community planning permit system. So that is step one in the process, is to have those policies. They've chosen to apply it to the entire town. And I've seen other examples, and there's only a handful. I want to say Gananoque, Carlton Place, Lake of Bays has used it only on their shoreline for shoreline development. And Brampton have used it on sort of like Queen Street. If you're familiar with Brampton, all I think is effectively their main street. And I think, so Brampton's used it on Queen Street. The City of Toronto adopted an official plan amendment to authorize it throughout the City of Toronto. And it got appealed to LPAT. And I haven't heard where that appeal sits. I get the impression that community planning permit was a brainchild of the former chief planner, Jennifer Keesmaat, who's no longer there. And with her being, doesn't have the kind of momentum that it had before. So one of the things that we spent some time talking about at our level is the design guidelines and how they would apply to infill. And so my thought is, even though we might say an official plan amendment that we could use a community planning permit system anywhere, what I really think that we would actually develop a bylaw for would be to deal with the infill development within the existing built-up areas. Can you advance the slide, Devin, please? So just here's a quick summary of what a community planning permit system would do. You have your policy basis in your OP, a bylaw that implements the community planning permit system, and then a development permit that's issued as a site plan approval. So you can see in the little graphic there, it combines the zoning, the minor variance, and site plan control together into a community planning permit system. So it's more of an integrated development. Can you go to the next slide, Devlin? So in terms of process, stage one would be having the official plan policies. Stage two is developing the community planning bylaw. That's got its own process under the Planning Act. It's very much like a zoning bylaw. So it would, in the areas where you created a community planning permit system bylaw, you would be replacing your zoning bylaw for those parts of town if we chose a certain area to apply it to. And then step three is beginning the process of actually issuing community planning permits. Can you go on, Devlin? So this is a little table that just shows how it's a little bit different. In terms of regulating development, when it comes to a zoning bylaw, they call a zoning bylaw a blunt instrument. It's sort of one or the other. Something in a zoning bylaw is either permitted or it's not permitted. And if it's not permitted, it's considered to be prohibited. And then by comparison, under a community planning permit, you could have a range of land uses that are permitted only under certain conditions. So as opposed to, zoning bylaw right now might allow in a commercial zone a whole bunch of uses. Under a community planning permit, it could be permitted only under certain conditions. So it brings forward the ability, as I mentioned before, that we might want to get away, if we want to get away from having a zone that only allowed a single detached dwelling, you could have more varieties of housing allowed in the same zone, but the community planning permit would have a set of criteria for when they were allowed or not allowed. Whereas zoning, if it's not permitted, then it means a zone change to make it permitted. When it comes to your development standards and the rules and the regulations in your zoning bylaw, you either meet it or you don't. If you don't meet it, you can go get a minor variance, which takes some time. In a community planning permit system, you would have, you may have a range of regulations. So your front yard setback, for instance, it could be a range instead of just a single number. So you might allow a variety of different frontages that could depend on where the other houses on the street are, for example, and have a range instead of just a fixed number. Can you go on to the next slide, Devlin, please? In terms of again, this is another just graphic demonstrating some of the differences. In the zoning bylaw, right now, if you've gone through a zoning amendment, you can't amend the bylaw for 2 years afterwards. Community planning permit system, because it's giving authority to a lot of time delegate it to staff to either approve or not approve something. Your community planning permit system is intended to really not be amended. So they extend the amount of time that your community planning permit system is kind of fixed in place, unless council specifically warrants it. When it comes to applying conditions in a zoning bylaw, there's no ability to establish conditions, and other than using holding zone provisions, which creates a whole other administrative process to go through. But in a community planning permit system, you include the types of conditions that you might see right in the bylaw. So one example that I could see that we struggle with sometimes with site plan approval is if a tree needs to be removed. We use site plan approval today, but sometimes we get a little bit of pushback because the township doesn't have a tree removal bylaw currently. But under a community planning permit system, you could have a clear condition, for example, that a tree removal required some kind of permission and or a condition for compensation for the trees that are removed. Again, today we do it more on a negotiated basis as opposed to making it an actual firm condition, given that we don't have a tree removal bylaw. Can you move on, Devlin, please? This slide just talks about the approval authority and the difference in the timelines. So under current conditions, if a development project needs an official plan amendment or a zoning bylaw amendment, those are things that only can be approved by council. If something needs a minor variance, we have a committee of adjustment to do that. Site plan approval is something that can be delegated. And in the case of Center Wellington, I have the delegated authority to grant site plan approval. So that part of it is done by staff. Under a community planning permit system, you would create a schedule of things that are council and things that are delegated. But the main difference when you look at the next row in the table is the legislative timelines. Under a zoning amendment, the goal, this describes it as legislative timelines, but it's really the time that someone can appeal. So a zoning bylaw amendment that we obtain, applications made, Planning Act provides that if we don't approve it within 90 days, the applicant can file an appeal to LPAC. Unfortunately, that ends up taking them a lot longer, so that rarely gets exercised. A minor variance is intended to be approved within 30 days. Site plan approvals intended to be done within 30 days. But in a community planning permit system, the legislation provides for a decision to be made within 45 days. So it is meant to, it would definitely streamline, say, in comparison to something that might otherwise need a zoning amendment. It would be a much shorter process.
Right, just
slide,
quick
Devlin.
question. Sorry if I can interrupt you. Just a quick question.
Sure.
45 days for the CPPS. Is that appealable, or are those conditions appealable?
Off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that. Don, I haven't dug into that level of detail yet.
Okay. Sorry, that just struck me there.
And here in the community planning permit, the appeal system is a little bit different. If we had a zoning bylaw amendment, for example, if council approved it, an applicant or a third party that objected could appeal it. A site plan approval can only be appealed by the applicant, and under a community planning permit system, only the applicant could appeal. So it's more like a site plan approval. And the downside to current going to LPAT for a zoning amendment, one of the things that does deter development is the prospect of getting appealed to LPAT, and you're probably looking at 6 months to a year at minimum to resolve an appeal that ends up at LPAT. So, in the case of Steve mentioned in his Grandwood subdivision, he had a desire to try for some stacked townhouse units. And his original draft plan included a site for stacked towns, but it ran into some neighborhood objections. And he chose then to remove the stacked towns from his draft plan because he didn't want to end up with an appeal. And so then it, got approved by council without stacked towns. Because going to LPAT, puts you in a timeline that you really can't predict. Can you go to the next slide, Devlin? So this is, these are the requirements that are set out in the regulations that deal with community planning permits under the Plan Act. So you have to identify in your OP a proposed community planning permit area. In the case of Niagara on the Lake, their intention at this time was to identify the entire town as a possible community planning permit area. But then your bylaw, your specific bylaw can only has to apply to a part of town. And as noted, my thought is you could apply that to the land that's within the built boundary or, a neighborhood specific thing, at least as a start, and you could grow from there. Next slide, Devin. So in your official plan, you need to set out the scope of the authority, things that can be delegated, and any limitations on the power to delegate. So in Niagara on the Lake, they've got the council can delegate to staff or to a council committee. Next slide, Devin. And when you do a community planning permit, official plan policies, you have to set out what your objectives are in having a community planning permit system. So you can see in Niagara on the Lake, they've identified small town character, conservation of cultural heritage, reflection of the design guidelines. So kind of the same things that we've been talking about that we might use a community planning permit for. They've also identified some other things about natural environment, agricultural protection, and streamlining the development process. Next slide. So again, in the community, the official plan, you've got to set out your criteria. What are the things that you would use to determine if you are or not going to approve a community planning permit? So, in the case of Niagara on the Lake, it's conformity with design guidelines, district plans, designation bylaws, our development standards. So this is a way for your development permit system or community planning permit system to really make sure that those standards get implemented, which is it's a little more difficult under the site plan process and street zone. Next slide, Devin. Again, your official plan policies have to identify the sort of conditions that you think you might attach. So there's a long list of things that we could include, and this would be where we might say tree permit, maintaining vegetation, and that sort of thing would get incorporated into conditions. Devlin, next slide. So, well, that was it for the open house. So those are really the details. I brought this forward today as the start of a discussion and not something that it'll take a bit of time to bring forward, but maybe as part of the toolbox that we talk about for housing, the development permit system is something that we want to entertain if we want to try to integrate some of the what I described earlier as the missing middle housing into some of our existing neighborhoods. A development permit system is ideal. So I'd like you to, if you can read the larger handbook that the province gave us, I can maybe provide some links to some of the other communities that have done a development permit system, so you can see what the details are like. Gananoque and Carlton Place are sort of the two that come to mind that have used it quite extensively in order to embody their design guidelines. So you can see in their community permit systems, their design guidelines are graphically illustrated right into their permit bylaw. And then ideally, if we're on board, I want to make sure that the county, when they come to their comprehensive review, that they include the authorizing policies in the county OP, so that we know that if the township decides to go ahead with a community planning permit at some point in the future, that we've got the ability to do it at the official plan level. So I mean, I can answer questions. I don't know. It's a new topic, but it's something that the province is really encouraging municipalities to do. There are some signs that there may be some places around transit areas where the province really is pushing for higher density development, that they may actually require municipalities to use the community planning permit. So I'm seeing more and more municipalities start to bring it forward as something that they're thinking about doing, and I think we should consider it as well.
Okay. Questions, Councillor Foster? I thought I saw your hand there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Brett, if I could. Brett, I wonder if you can speak to this community planning permit system and as it pertains to preserving our built heritage in the downtowns of Ferguson and Elora. What would be the impact on development in heritage areas if we were to adopt a system like this?
Well, I think the idea is that it would enable us to have more of the design guidelines or the criteria or conditions that we don't have now, for instance, with zoning. With zoning, you either comply or you don't. Use is either permitted or you don't. Whereas if we develop design guidelines in a community planning permit system, you would have more ability to attach conditions to your approval. So, for example, if it was an application that required a heritage impact assessment, for example, and the heritage impact assessment had a bunch of recommendations, those recommendations could be carried forward into the conditions that are on the development permit. That's just for instance. We don't have really any kind of architectural control or architectural guidelines don't exist in zoning. So if you want to have any kind of design guidelines or architectural criteria, built form standards, they're better off being brought forward through a community planning permit. And also some of those variable things that, a lot of our neighborhoods, we have a mix. You could see some neighborhoods, there's a bunch of houses that are close to the street without much of a setback. There's other neighborhoods where the houses tend to be set back a lot farther. So you might have in a development permit system that for the ability to have the front yard setback vary according to the setbacks of the houses that are already on the street or the setback of the houses on either side. So you end up with a more uniform streetscape. Could include things like the placement of the garage and whether the garage is in behind or sticking out the front. We can use design guidelines to some degree, but we only right now our site plan control bylaw is limited to covering certain things, which is basically lot grading and drainage. There's not a whole lot. We'd have to write a whole new site plan control bylaw to get at the design criteria. And a development permit system could replace that and also give the ability to have conditions that we don't have.
Okay. Follow up, Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chairman Don. Follow up, Brett. The Planning Act's very clear that conservation areas and heritage areas shall be preserved. So I wonder if you can comment on that with respect to this community planning permit system. How would it impact on our duty to conserve our heritage areas?
Yeah, well, heritage areas are right now pretty loosely defined. If we had a heritage conservation district, they have their own permit process, so that could be dealt with separately. But you might have, and I'm not sure it necessarily has to be heritage related, or is it just having new development that fits the context that's there, whether it's heritage or not. But again, the advantage of the permit system is the ability to have development criteria that are more site specific and the ability to have conditions. So again, if you had a heritage impact assessment that you wanted, that was applied or asked for as part of the development permit process in a certain neighborhood, and there were conditions or recommendations in that heritage impact assessment through a development permit system, you could bring those conditions forward. Zoning bylaw itself has no ability to incorporate conditions. So those kind of recommendations that deal with the built form or the character or heritage preservation can be integrated into a development permit system in a stronger fashion than we have with zone and that we have with site plan. We can't use site plan approval to deny something that the zoning permits. So development permit makes it easier to use.
Okay, anybody else? Tony, we got your message. You have anything to
Yeah,
add?
sorry about that. I'm going to
No problem.
stage 2 with my stupid cast.
Oh, okay.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Anybody else? Don?
Okay, to Kelly's point, when we're discussing the affordable housing, I'm chair of economic development, and we developed this little package here, and it goes through, it's an implementation plan, and I think, Kelly, tell me whether we can give it to everybody here or not, but a great model of how to put this together so we can start keeping track of all this stuff. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry, Don.
No, I was saying it was a good thought. Kelly?
Yeah, sorry, Don. I know that's what I was talking about, Don, about for the next meeting to have something with a little bit of structure, so we can keep track of. Because there's a number of things that Brett was talking about today, and it's like, oh, that might tie back into our conversation before, so we don't want to lose those connections. So I think a document like that would help us out. So that's exactly what was in my mind. Somewhere. So we'll work.
I think if you could send this out, it's all color coordinated. So the different topics that we have in there, it's really easy to follow along, and we're going to be talking about this tomorrow and following up on some of the stuff that we had going. So
okay. Grace, did I see your hand? Unmute. Still got unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
It seems like it's a really good plan to make everything more efficient and happen faster. Is there a downside to it that you see at all, Brent? Because it seems like maybe something to proceed with fairly quickly.
Well, I would say that what I've seen is, because you've seen in the slides, it's sort of once you've got it, it's really kind of fixed for 5 years. So the downside, I think, is the development permit system and your permit bylaw will take time to put it together, and it requires a level of trust. So you've got to build a community trust that if staff are delegated, for instance, to approve things, that level of trust is there, that everybody's happy that what the permit system allows or provides for and gets approved by staff or by council, I guess, is what you're happy with, and that trust needs to be there. What I've seen a little bit in the Toronto area is a backlash that the province is pushing the development permit system in order to push unwanted development on people. So that I think is the downside of, you got to have your process of developing your permit bylaw with good community support and buy-in so that people are happy. I think you also need to have, the development community or the building community support, or, landowner support, that they're prepared to live with what you put in the community planning permit system bylaw, because it's not as readily changed. So you create the system, you get streamlined approvals if you comply with the system. If you don't comply with the regulations, you're not going to get a permit at all. So, as opposed to, if you don't comply with zoning, you can go get a variance. So there's a bit of give and take. That's my only answer to that question.
Thanks.
Marianne, I thought I saw your hand.
Yes, thank you. So, excuse me, I just wanted to add a little bit about the heritage piece that Councillor Foster asked about. And so we do have the tools currently under the Heritage Act. So when you have an individually designated property, you look to what the bylaw says. We also could have a heritage district, but that's focused specifically on heritage and what is identified in very prescriptive guidelines that are developed through that process for a specific area. And we do have that tool available, and some of that will come out of our cultural heritage landscape study in terms of recommendations to move forward on some of those. But what the development permit system does is it further augments that in terms of community character. And we talked a lot about character previously in terms of how to capture that, how to maintain some of that in terms of the small town feel. So with a development permit system, what you do is a lot of the work up front in terms of studying the character. So it goes beyond just heritage, because there's more to character than just heritage in our community. So it further establishes where you could study character and try to put that down in terms of a set of guidelines that are specific to a particular neighborhood where you want to put the system in place. So you can actually establish what you want to see there, how you want it to look and feel, and put that in the guidelines in the development permit system, so that it's much less work later on in terms of approvals, but the work is done up front in terms of establishing a character, establishing parameters around what you want to see in that specific area, and then it's a much better system at the end of the process in terms of trying to put in place those goals that you have for that particular neighborhood. So I hope that helps answer it a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Who hasn't? Kathy.
I read through the whole document, and and because I've been involved in heritage and I'm also on Committee of Adjustment, I had a couple of questions about the process. So, Brett, does it appear, like, my understanding when I read through it is all the public participation has to be upfront. So when you're looking at the OP and the community planning permits, that the public has a chance to have some say in whether they like it or not at that point. And then after that, it's sort of left to the designate to decide on if this project meets the permit or not. So would that sort of alleviate some of this kind of like what Steve went through, where he has his plan all in place and then a community group can sort of say, you know what, no, I don't like it and I don't want it to go forward, and change his design? Is that sort of part, am I understanding that correctly, I guess?
Yeah, you're right, Kathy. That the understanding of the process is you put your effort into getting the community buy-in into that permit bylaw, and then there is no sort of public process associated with those development permits. On site plan today is very similar. There's no public process or consultation or notification on a site plan. But there is if something needs a minor variance or a zone change. So again, part of the challenge is you got to build that trust in the community that when you did your permit bylaw, you've come up with a form of development that the community has agreed upon is acceptable, because once that's in place, you're approving developments in accordance with that, and there's not public consultation included.
Anybody else? Councilor Craig. Unmute.
Just reading the manual and reading some additional research, one of the things that certainly came across to me was the importance of public consultation, that it is the most important element of this whole system. And they were talking about the importance of bringing in skilled facilitators and public consultation experts to make sure you get it right. Because the whole focus of having this adopted is developing that trust, and not just trust within terms of residents, but trust on the part of developers, trust on the part of politicians. So up front, there's a huge piece of work involved in just trying to develop the trust by having comprehensive engagement with the public to identify, as Marion has pointed out, what is the community character? What is the shared vision of the community for what we want to look like? Because once you can define that, then this is a very powerful tool in terms of ensuring that the community's vision moves forward. So when we talk about that small town feel, we will achieve it if this tool is developed correctly. The other thing I read too, in terms of the amount of work that has to be done up front, is they're suggesting you need to have sort of an approved secondary plan. You need to have your urban design guidelines sorted out. You need to have a community improvement plan. And then of course, there's also the heritage aspect as well, having your heritage resource master plan in place as well. So they're just saying there's a lot of upfront work that has to be done before you can actually embark on this. But what I've read, it sounds like it's a fascinating tool that we should consider, and at the very least encourage the county to put into their official plan that there is allowance for being able to develop this if we want to proceed with that.
Okay. Thank you. Good points. And I think that's probably historically why there hasn't been a lot of uptake for development permits over the years, is because of the massive amount of work that needs to be done up front when you already have a lot of that covered in your existing zoning or the existing rules. Maybe that's changed because of the situation we're in, but I know that the concept's been around for a while and not a lot of people have adopted it until now. So, and also the fact that, and this is a political question, you're basically telling the neighbors, once you've got it in place, there's no appeal. They don't have a chance to object. They don't have a chance to shape the development that's coming. They're cut out of the picture at that point, which is why you need all that upfront work, because once it's in place, it's in place. So this is kind of a new tack that municipalities would have to take, because it is a very significant change to how things are done up until now. But it is a very powerful tool if it's in place, and it certainly addresses a lot of the concerns that, say, developers have in terms of timelines and process and cost. And that in turn helps address, according to them, their ability to deliver the kind of affordable housing or attainable housing that we're looking for. So worthy of much consideration, and this is going to be, given the discussion we've had already, this is going to be very interesting going forward. Anybody else comments? Obviously, we have to do a lot of reading and a lot of thinking. Councillor McCrae again.
Thank you. I just want to add, one of the cities that was cited as being very good at this process is Vancouver. Vancouver has developed a public engagement system that has worked effectively to the point that they have built a strong sense of trust between the citizens, planners, politicians, and developers. So that may be a place to also look at how they're doing it.
Well, one way or the other, that's what you have to do. So, okay. Anything else to add, Brett?
Maybe a little bit off topic, but to the conversation about the housing situation, what we do for our next meeting, I wonder if it would be beneficial maybe to share with the group. Kelly could answer this question, I guess. The county housing strategy that was done, because there's recommendations and things in there that could form part of what we look at as a group that were for the municipalities to take on. If that would be a place to try to create that action plan by using the county strategy that's already been done.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, we don't want to go in another direction. We want to make sure it is consistent. It's pretty comprehensive, that document. So we just have to make sure that we're targeted in bringing that in, because wouldn't want that to kind of overwhelm the process. But I like the point, Brett, that we should at least tap into some of the good work that was done on that front and make sure that's consistent where the township plays in the whole issue, and where the county should play. Because there will be different roles based on it being county and the township, and we want to make sure that they're not confused, even if our plans include talking to the county or pushing the county to do a certain thing. It's probably a good place to start for sure.
Okay.
Well, we could even synthesize it a little bit so people don't have to read through all the research, just get into kind of the recommendations that affect the local level. And I know Marianne and we spend quite a bit of time talking about some of the challenges with housing and getting things built. And, we are regularly receiving inquiries and things. So we have a pretty good handle on what the barriers are, at least as far as our own regulations. And we could put that in a summary too, that'll give something to talk about for our next meeting too.
Good. That's a good thing. Although I don't know if that's a real problem with this group. Kathy.
I just wondered if there's some way to access the rent, how much rent is around this area compared to sort of further north, further south? Like, is that available anywhere? Because, I've been out of the rental market for like many, many, many years. I have really no idea what it would cost to rent a place for one bedroom, unless I look in the newspaper, but I'm out of touch with that. I wonder if there is an opportunity to have some, if that's available anywhere.
Who can answer that? Anybody? Bob?
I could, the county housing staff would have access to that information for sure, because that's how they make decisions on affordable housing units and the percentage of rent geared to income and all that kind of stuff. So I can imagine if it's valuable for this group to have that information, that I'll be able to get it through county staff.
I'm out of touch. So when Maddie's talking about the impact on people. Like, I have no idea what rents cost. So it's hard for me to make a judgment on, I know it's high for sure, but how does that, how much does, somebody on a low income wage, what percentage of that wage goes to rent? And what do they have left over? And then how do you look at development to say, is it possible to build anything that will be even close to that? Like, it's a place for me to sort of start because I'm out of touch with that altogether.
Okay. Kelly?
Yeah, good comments, Kathy. And, it provides some really important context that you don't want to go too far down the path of having discussions without having that context. So I'll work with their county staff to make sure that we have something that provides some context for that for the next meeting.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, that Kelly and Kathy have just kind of articulated my question, which was, I think Kathy's correct. It'd be useful for this committee to have some sort of a baseline or a report, perhaps from staff, on how much exactly does it cost for a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom apartment in Center Wellington compared to other communities, and also how much exactly would it cost for a baseline home in our community relative to other communities. That would give us all like a sense of the floor price for housing, if you will. I'm wondering if we could ask, and Kelly, you've already spoke to this briefly, some kind of a brief report at our next meeting on those costs.
I'd prefer to not task our township staff with doing that work. They got enough on their plates. I'd prefer to me do the work and ask county staff to bring contacts forward. They're the ones that do housing, not our group. So I think they're the ones that are going to have that information at their fingertips. So I'll pursue that if that works.
Yeah, that's fine, Kelly. That's good. It gives us a baseline to work from. That was kind of my point. Thank you.
Maddie, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I would just also challenge people, if you want to know what's going on, go on Kijiji. Go on Skyline, go on Williams McDaniel to see what they're renting their apartments for. And then consider what minimum wage is, consider what living on social assistance is, and you can very quickly, A, get a picture of what the stock is and how there's like nothing out there, and B, where the rents are kind of at. Like, I would say a 1-bedroom apartment, you're looking at $1,200, if not more.
Okay. Anybody else? That was a very fulsome discussion. All right, seeing nobody's hand up, I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. I see our next meeting is what, December the 2nd? And we would look forward to at least the beginnings of an action plan similar to the Economic Development Task Force coming forward, which I really look forward to seeing. And obviously we go forward from there, and certainly the development permit concept is one we're going to be looking at over and over again. So unless anybody else has anything to say, Councillor McCrae, you're muted. There we go.
I'd just like to recommend to the group that if there's any way that we can keep Maddie on our committee, that would be great, because of the work experience and background that she has in terms of the whole attainable housing. I think it's important that we continue to have her voice on the committee if possible. So even if she was to be our consultant, I think it would be great if she could continue.
Well, if she's willing, we'll see. I don't know what can be done, but we'll look into it. Anybody else? All right. Thank you so much. Good to see you all again. And it looks like we're going to have, all right, your team bye. Okay. We're going to have some very interesting discussions going forward. So thank you very much. We're adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.